Hello and welcome to the Conscious Communion podcast, where we traverse through the inner dwellings of the human experience through conversation. I'm your host, Danae. Join me as we explore the interconnection of creativity and community. Dr. David Wayne is a psychoanalyst and a licensed marriage and family therapist practicing his craft for the past 47 years. He has his own practice and lives and breathes his work with the way he interacts with the world and everyone he meets. He is a father, a grandfather, an uncle, a friend. He loves deeply, vulnerably, and with intention. Here is Dr. David Wayne, a.k.a. in my circle, Uncle Dave. Uncle Dave, hello. It's such an honor and a privilege to have you in this space with me. Hello.
Good morning from west
I'm so fortunate
California.
Enough.
It's raining.
Is it raining there today?
Oh, it's been pouring
Oh, wow.
all day.
We have so similar. Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's so nice. You get some nourishment with the earth today. That is a celebration.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's so sweet to have you here in this space. Yeah, always. Uncle Dave is Brian's uncle, and he is one of my favorite people that I've been able to encounter in this life and on this path. And he really does just embody wisdom, discernment, and kindness in the way that he interacts with people. And immediately when I was able to meet him, I just felt drawn to him. And the more we got to talking, the more we realized that we really do have similar hearts and spirits. So I'm super privileged to have you here in this space.
I would say the feeling is mutual. My first experience of you was, who is this bright sunshine lady that's bringing brightness into our family world? So, yeah.
So sweet. So sweet. I would love for you to share a little bit about your life. I know that Brian has shared a little bit about his life, and the two intertwine, obviously. So I've talked about how so much of our childhood shapes the way that we are. And for you and the work that you do, I just wanted to see how maybe your childhood impacted your choice and your decision to study the human mind and really help and facilitate folks with their pain and their trauma.
Well, that's a wide open question. Let me see.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah. See where it takes you.
Go with this. Over the years, many years ago, I came to conclude that those of us who are in the field, some kind of healing profession, is an indirect attempt to heal ourselves. And for many of us, like myself, I remember going into grad school at the age of 25 to become a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I was ready to save the world. Part of our own training was that we had to be in 50 hours of our own therapy. I'd never darkened the door of a therapist's office before. And I think it was the second session, my therapist asked me, so when was the last time you cried? And I think I vaguely remembered a time maybe when I was 10, 11 years old, and I couldn't remember having cried since. And as I thought factually about my life, I thought, there's plenty there to cry about. And then about 5 sessions in, she said, have you ever thought of yourself as depressed? Well, I knew depressed as a clinical term. I had never attached to any part of my own experience. And so that was the beginning of my own search. In the field, we call this research is me search. When we discover that it's me search, that's another story. A lot of therapists, a lot of people in the healing profession are getting clinical skills to help others, but don't really understand their personal connection to it and the personal meaning of it. And so that was the beginning of my own discovery of what I was looking for, what I was needing for myself. and really years later coming to terms with, I really have some what I would call, in the field we call it small t or large T trauma. And large T trauma is oftentimes things that happen early in our development where we don't have the defenses or coping mechanisms or choices to survive that. And so in a
Right.
simple way, I would think that when we experience trauma, either too much aggression, too much stimulation, or the absence of care, we shut down, we close up, and life becomes transactional. We figure out, how do I figure out how to belong? How do I figure out how to be safe? How do I figure out how to belong, get through life? And so, in that transactional way, we have to grow up really quickly. We have to look out here to figure out how to be safe and how to get through the day. But we are really closed to true connection, where instead of strategic, we can communicate to another, and that we don't then depend on just communicating our insights, communicating how we feel, reaching out, communicating what we need. So in trauma, it extinguishes the reach out to others. And so now we're not really attempting, I'm going to tell you how you are affecting me as you're talking to me or behaving towards me. I'm not doing that anymore because that was not successful. So now I have to be strategic. Let's see, we're on the podcast today. What does Danae want me to say? What will keep me out of trouble? I don't want to say something embarrassing. And so it's strategic rather than us just going back and forth and being in the flow of the moment and getting to be. And so in this closed up space, as much as we need connection, we're also afraid of it. And when it happens really early, it means we really don't even have a choice, because our neurology helps protect us. We have these well-defined patterns based on expectation, based from the past. And so in my story, I would say fairly early in my career, I came to understand that I had trauma in my own life, early trauma. And so for many years, ever since, I would say I've been a seeker in trying to open up that part of myself that is closed. And that's a difficult project. And there's all kinds of different approaches to help in that regards.
Yeah.
So it's really been a journey for me of, and I would say that engaging with my patients, clients who are suffering, who have trauma, who are struggling with depression, anxiety, addiction, all of those kinds of things, how much they have taught me about my own life. One of my favorite books is a book by Patrick Casement called Learning from the Patient. And if we're really open to experiencing the other in the moment, they're going to affect us. Right?
Absolutely.
It's bi-directional. We affect each other. And if we're going to stay connected, it means we need to communicate how we affect each other, and we find the balance, we find the rhythm that works for both of us. And every diet is different. Right? So you have to be open to that. So a long answer to your question, how I found my way into this was, I enjoyed people. I've always, I would say in retrospect, how transactionally I have found my way through the world is to be a caretaker, is to be a giver, but also at the detriment to myself. So while I'm giving, I'm not truly taking in when I'm operating in that state. And so that's been a journey about how, because to open up to receive love from somebody else, when your bones tell you, your brain tells you there's trauma waiting, there's rejection waiting, there's shame waiting, there's danger waiting, it's hard, it's very vulnerable to open up.
Yeah,
I would say
definitely.
for myself and with patients that we traverse into this territory, it really feels like a life and death choice, meaning that oftentimes what's remembered in your bones is I
Hmm.
died in that moment, or I got killed, or I got annihilated, and I had to go away. I had to hide because when I put myself out there, I get attacked or I get ignored. And so when that's what your bones are anticipating, and I'm saying, come out and
Hmm.
play with me. There's a friendly person out here, and I want to help you. As much as everything that they know about me might be true, their neurology still might not cooperate. Their bodies still might not cooperate in opening up to connection.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
yeah,
That was such a beautiful answer. And I think especially with the idea of shutting down, I think so many of us in our culture have the tendency to do that. But you and I know, especially because we've had many conversations about this, that it's so important to stay open. So how would you suggest for people to stay open and to give love another chance for connection's sake and for,
hmm
the sake of the world? How would you
yeah. For
suggest
this,
that?
well, in the broadest sense, talk therapy is interesting. That it can
Hmm.
help with many things. Um, but the moments in time that really make a change, and we know this in education, we know that when children are emotionally engaged in what they're learning, they're interested, they're curious, um, they
Mm,
are open to taking in, and they are not only going to remember what they've learned, but they're also going to integrate it into their daily lives in whatever way it can be integrated. So,
mm,
so we know that the action takes place around being physically present, emotionally affected by the experience in a relational context. And so oftentimes in
wait, cut
talk
out again.
therapy, I work with people probably for a longer period than not, in the sense that many people now come to me that have been in other forms of kind of cognitive therapy and other forms of kind of what I would say has a very a specific application and a kind of a recipe, and not to, and I don't speak disparagingly of any of those. I think all of the different ways that humans have come to learn how to help other people, and so oftentimes people start with give me the magic pill or tell me what to do, and that might work for some period of time. So oftentimes they get people that have tried other forms of therapy, where I would describe what we're doing is it's a human relationship. You and me are in a
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and how am I going to help you, and how are you going to help me help you? It's a puzzle
Mm-hmm.
that's has a lot in common with every
Mm-hmm.
human, and every diet is different as well. And so I will
Mm-hmm.
often tell my patients, I don't operate from the medical model, meaning you come in, I'm going to take your pulse and your temperature, and I'm going to poke around, and I'm going to treat you as a passive recipient. This is a team. This is teamwork. I can't do this without you. You can't do this
Mm,
without me. Um,
yeah.
and so that's the first part. And then now we start slogging through these difficult things. I'm trying to open up and I just can't, and I'm reacting and I'm disconnecting and running away. And um, and so I sometimes say, so then we wait for life to happen. Now, what I mean by that is, and
Mm,
I don't wish crisis on anyone or difficulties in life on anyone, but waiting for life to happen can have two different paths. One is life happens out there. A patient comes in now and they've got a diagnosis of terminal cancer, or their spouse just told them
mm,
they wanted a divorce, or one of their children is having difficulty, and they're in a crisis.
and
In
war.
crisis, we are. It is a window that opens up. It's a window of opportunity. One of my philosophy friends calls this the liminal moment. It's a moment in time that life happens, and it's a window that we don't know how long it'll be open, and we don't know if it will ever open up again. And so in crisis, what
Yeah.
I've learned is I really go after the patient at this point to connect with them. And so traditional talk therapy, we maybe meet once a week. In psychoanalytic therapy, I've seen some patients 4 times a week for a number of years. So it's a
Oh,
very
wow.
intensive, deep dive into an attachment relational experience. But even then, our resistances, and it's not really, resistance is kind of an old analytic word. We really talk about how the trauma-based closing up is just something we don't know how to open up. So here comes a crisis moment. I have a patient as an example who's currently in what I call my ICU. And I reach out to this patient several times a day via text. I'll just simply say, morning rounds, vitals please, and there's a connection. Now, for some time with this particular patient, I reach out and we meet once a week as well. But in this context, I'm giving her an echo, meaning I hold you in mind. I am connecting with you. Now, I've suggested to the patient, and when you're in distress, she falls into nighttime terrors, you can reach out to me. We've been doing this for a month, and she's not yet reached out to me. So you can see how hard it is. She's still depending on me. We're creating some new neuronal pathways in this she's in this very raw, terrifying place. When this first opened up, I just kind of grabbed her and I looked her straight in the eyes and I said her name and I said, I am taking your terror very seriously. Because there's another part of her that's going, I feel so childlike and this is silly. I'm afraid of the dark and I'm an adult. And so there's this other part that's shaming her back into closing up. And I'm saying, and so some of the most important bridge, the moment where I really made the bridge with her was when she was in terror, she was in shame, like I'm being silly about this. And I just looked right at her and I said, I am taking your terror very seriously. You are now in my ICU. And she was just looking at me like, you're going to do what? So this is a dramatic change of our frame, which can be jostling too. Like, wait a minute, what are you doing? And so we are now on a path where I am checking on her multiple times a day, and it's really interesting because she is she comes from a sport that is extremely physically demanding and risk-taking. And I playfully said to her the other night, because I had missed a night, and I thought maybe she might reach out to me if I'm not reaching out to her. I didn't hear from her. And so I said, I'm on the verge of daring the athlete in you to take a chance and reach out. And I put a little chicken emoji playfully. We have a good sense of humor with each other. And she pushed back she said, I'm on the path. I need to go at my own pace. Now here she's asserting herself with me. And so now we're open lines. See, she's saying I pushed too hard, and she pushed back with me, and she sent me a little emoji with the chicken that's half hatched, where it's still half in the shell and half out, and she says, I'm making progress.
That's so beautiful.
So now
boundaries, right?
We're communicating. She's saying saying too much too fast. I texted her back and I said, absolutely, at your pace, at your pace. So
that's so beautiful.
So here we got to the trauma place, the closed up place in a moment of crisis. However it happened, we're waiting for life to happen. And when that happens, I get to jump in and grab her and now we're connecting. Yeah.
And how would you say that you would, because you had mentioned, right, in your first correspondence with us, with me, and you just chatting it up about how you got started with this, you have to really look at yourself first. So how would you recommend for folks to look at themselves, and when they're going through that process, like what tools would you suggest for them to look at themselves, one, and then two, just to meet themselves with grace and compassion as they are traversing through the experience of looking at those hard things in their lives?
Well, people who knock on my therapist's door, I would say, have some combination of courage and desperation. And I don't know how much portion of which, right? But it takes courage to look inside. Many people that come in, I might ask them a question about their childhood, and they will say to me, this is just kind of representing one category. They'll say to me, if you're one of those therapists that want to talk about how your childhood affects you now, I just want to move forward. I'm a positive thinker. I want tools. Give me some tools. And I'll say, well, I'm not one of those kind of therapists, because you cannot separate the past from the present. The fact that you've taken this course in life probably means there's something really awful and difficult and frightening and maybe hopeless or feeling impossible to go back to, and you just want to lock that in a vault and never return to it. But the bad news for the day is you can't lock it in the vault. Whether it stays in your unconscious or not, your history is affecting you every day of your life. And so if you want to work with me, we're going to talk about the past, the present, and the future, and how they're all connected. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's my last episode. I was talking about that very thing, and really my own evolve in that process, and knowing that while I did go through some things and I felt like I was better, and then I went down and fell back down into another slump again, because there was still so much that I didn't allow myself to process. It was like, girl, you're only processing what feels comfortable rather than going to the depths of the uncomfortable. And it's almost like you have to go there to really set yourself free, right? Like,
the whole trip will be uncomfortable on the light end and terrifying on the other end. Okay.
Like a roller coaster.
That's right. And so when you're saying uncomfortable, I would say what's tolerable, what we can tolerate.
That's good. That's good.
In my informed consent, when somebody first comes to see me, they read, I have an introduction for them, and we can talk about therapy in all kinds of different ways. One of the things that I say in my introduction is sometimes in therapy, experiences that were previously unbearable can be transformed into something bearable. Because when something is unbearable, we close up and we disconnect, and so that part of us is unavailable to live life and to connect with life and to connect with other people. And so it is a torturous journey. It's a terrifying journey, really. And in therapy, as therapists, we're so eager to want to connect and wanting to help people grow and wanting to open up. In order to do that, and so when I said to my patient, I am taking your terror very seriously. We could say for most people, their terror wasn't taken seriously. Maybe it wasn't even recognized, right?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
So the person has to know that you're connected to the terror. So everywhere along the way, it's very common where I'll have a session with a patient where we've really connected, and they leave feeling pretty good, and I feel like, okay, we've made some progress. Oftentimes, the next session, they'll come in, they will have totally forgotten what we had talked about. They might be late to the session. They might cancel the session for some bogus reason. They might forget the session and didn't come at all. So when we
Interesting.
lean into our vulnerable places, oftentimes there's a reaction that pulls us back unconsciously, unknowingly, that just
Yeah.
pulls us back. And so I spend a lot of time talking with patients. Okay, you just disconnected again, or you just pulled back. What just happened
Mm.
here? You got afraid of something. So it's connecting with the fear that's so important. So sometimes we see a wall and we want to just break the wall down. Give me tools to break the wall down. No, that wall is
Yeah.
there for a reason. It's there protecting you from something. We need to know what it is that you're protecting from, what you are afraid from. Because the only way the wall is going to come down is when you let it down. And the only way it comes down is when you feel safety and connection with another person.
Mm. That's so good. That is so good. And it's so true, right? Like we are meant to work together.
Together, we
We're not meant to do this life
we are
alone.
social creatures. No, we don't do well in
Mm-hmm.
isolation. We do not do well in isolation.
Mm-mm. No.
Here's the other waiting for life thing to happen where a crisis happens,
Yeah.
and that is in our relationship, that is in my relationship as a therapist with my patient. Meaning, I am imperfect. I make mistakes. I can do something thoughtless or hurtful with my patient. So, one author says we can empathically get it right 1,000 times in a row with our patient, and that's good foundation building for the really important moment, and that is actually when you, as the therapist, fail your patient. What
Mm-hmm.
happens next? Because for being closed up, it means we don't close up quickly unless we're in a bomb blast or something. The kind of cumulative closing up, I reach out, I reach out, I reach out, and after a while we just give up, right? And we close up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in that space, uh, there's just never a recognition of the failure on the part of the caregiver. Or if there is, and the child protests, the caregiver is going to blame the child or leave the child feeling like they need too much or they're too sensitive or blah blah blah,
Mm.
and the child is left to feel that it's their problem. And
Right.
so one author says the patient is unconsciously creating a theater in which the therapist is in the play as the caregiver. And the patient unconsciously leads
Mm.
the therapist into a situation in which the therapist fails the patient.
Mm. Almost like a test.
It is exactly a test. Not almost that you hit the nail on the head. It's exactly a test. And the test is, number one, will I as the therapist recognize that I
Mm.
failed you? And number two,
Wow.
will I own up to it? And do I have genuine remorse? For this kind of terrain, the person's never experienced that. So it's a hope. But for most
Wow.
people, it's just like a Disney fantasy. It's never happened. And
Right.
yet, in this relationship, so here we are. I've now failed my patient. I won't go into details, but let me just give you one example in which I failed a patient in a way that shocked her, that she felt dropped, that I suddenly, like, I had become a different person, or a question about what the boundaries of the relationship were. Um, and, and, and she was not in a place where she would reach out to me with her distress. When I connected with her next, she told me that she had been in her moments when she didn't have anything to do, was sobbing uncontrollably for 6 days
Mm. Oh
because
no.
of we in our field sometimes we call this an enactment. It means I become and And it's not that I'm just a puppet and I don't have my own script. I do. I am being myself and coming into her play, and I have fulfilled the role. So here I just really traumatized her. When and this was on a Zoom. As soon as I got off the Zoom, I said, "What did I just do?" I knew, like I had lost my mind, and now I was in this position. Do I reach back out to her? So my second failure was I didn't reach right back out to her. I was spinning, and what do I do? And so in our next session, I started the session because we had texted. We texted a couple of times, and she was in the text minimizing the effect on her. She was actually trying to take care of me. It's okay. We make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. In the session, I started with tears in my eyes. In fact, I couldn't talk for a little bit. And I said, I dropped you. I hurt you. And I just went into what I was imagining, what I felt from her was the effect that I had on her. And then she started sobbing and telling me I've been sobbing for the last 6 days. We had this wonderful session. We were waiting for life to happen with me dropping her, with me hurting her, with me failing her, and what I would do with it.
Wow.
The relationship is now an open connection. She now trusts me that she can say, Dr. Wayne, would you be quiet and let me talk now? And she has a trust that I'm listening, and that we're informing each other about how to be together.
Yeah, it's two ways.
There's
because it's impossible to not
I had to
impact one another
I had to be vulnerable with her.
Right. And she needed to see that.
She needed to feel it, see it, hear it, all of the senses. I didn't want to...
in her body, mind, and spirit,
I didn't want to do it on Zoom. I didn't want to do it... I was waiting till we were face-to-face, and we could have, body-to-body communication that I really felt. Because, when you're open to the other person, when you're connected in this way... when you suffer, I suffer. I feel your suffering. And if I created your suffering, even more so.
Absolutely. Right? Especially if that goes uncommunicated. If it is pushed under a rug and nobody ever talks about it again, then that leaves more room for a festering to take place. And that's just not a good place to be.
It kills hope. It causes one to close up. Living life transactionally again. How do you be safe in a world that doesn't pay attention, that isn't aware of their effect on me, or they don't care, or they blame me for the rupture. So that for many patients, that is the start of a new relationship relating to the world. Is oh my gosh, there's actually a human out there that owns their own stuff, and it's really interesting because it's to be open to one's own imperfection, one has to also come to terms with whatever shame and fear inhibitions one has, right? And so just because you're a therapist doesn't mean that you're ready to do that. It took me many years to get to this place in my practice and in my life. I supervise a lot of younger therapists that come stuck with a patient and not understanding their own part of kind of recreating the parent situation and saying, well, if there's a rupture between us, you really, speaking to the patient, you're really having a hard time trusting me. I'm really here. No, you really weren't there in that moment. I've often said that to the clinician that I'm supervising. You thought you were open and receptive, but your patient was right. They were reading you correctly. So in this terrain where we're talking about this kind of vulnerability of visiting previous experiences that were traumatic, that caused us to close up, there has to be a level of trust that's built over time, and then waiting for life to happen, either inside or outside the therapeutic relationship.
And that's so good. I mean, that goes for also just regular relationships too,
You
right?
translate all of this into everyday life. I'm talking about it from people who are coming in. But you know what? We all suffer. Being human is not easy. Okay.
No.
So, first of all, to admit that to ourselves, also to admit that we are imperfect. I was reading a meditation a while back where the writer was distinguishing between imperfect and inadequate. And he comes from a Catholic background, and so there's a religious bent, as I do, in which the word imperfect in the world that I grew up in, the word that I heard was sin. My sinful nature, which by definition is shameful. I'm born into the world, and I have to apologize for my existence because I'm a sinful creature. I like the word imperfect because it takes the judgment out of it. It just says we make mistakes. We don't know everything. We can be greedy. We can be we can act out of fear and judgment and even violence. We can hate. To embrace all of those things in a way, this is where we all start. We don't even have to apologize for that. We're all in the same boat. We're all imperfect. So I've embraced that idea of imperfection in a way that people that I'm working with, in particular, younger therapists that I'm supervising, when I'm talking very matter-of-factly about, here's an imperfect moment in my supervising you, and saying it matter-of-factly, not as if, hey, I'm just who I am, and take it or leave it. But I'm saying it matter-of-factly, but in the context of, and I'm aware of how it's affected you, or I'm listening to you tell me how it's affecting you, and I'm owning my part. And, and when we do that, with other people, it gives them grace too. It's like, oh my gosh, it means I don't have to be perfect with you. It means if I forget or I say something, this or that or the other, and it starts to help them open up too. So wherever we connect in the world, when we are open, it opens people up. They open up too. It's powerful. It's really powerful.
It sure is. The vulnerability aspect means something, and I think we're all mirrors for each other. So it's impossible for someone to see someone be vulnerable and then them not at least be curious.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Right? Like the curiosity is like the spark of everything. And I wanted to circle back on what you had said about sin, because it's so interesting to me that in Hebrew, sin means missing the mark. And it's so fascinating to me that word has gotten so
deep in our bones,
misused. It's deep in our bones.
What I grew up
with. Most definitely. Especially, I grew up Catholic, and the word sin was very much a part of the guilt and shame that we felt for missing the mark. And it was so fascinating to me because it really attaches to your bones. Like you said, it becomes a part of your being and who you think you are when it's not the truth. Where it's just not.
And missing the mark. I mean, you never taught me to shoot a bow and arrow. I don't even know what the mark is. What are you talking about?
Exactly. Exactly. I don't remember what book it was, but I was reading this beautiful translation about sin and talking about literally what you just said. You didn't teach me how to shoot this bow and arrow, and how am I supposed to know when I'm missing the mark? And why am I being held to these expectations that are unrealistic?
Yeah, and
Like,
so
you
how about
know?
if we just say we're imperfect? We're that's going to
Yeah.
be our baseline here. And when we don't get it right, we're going to communicate to each other, and we'll figure it out because we care.
So good. Yes. And have grace for each other amidst it all.
Ourselves and each other. That's right.
So beautiful. Because you brought it up, I would really love to hear about your childhood growing up and in a religious background, and then really now you being a spiritual being that really follows spirituality and more of the oneness of all life, and what that looks like for you, and how, because I know it's a deconstructive
It is.
process,
It is. And that
so
word is an interesting word
yeah, I'd love
because
to hear a little bit about it.
therapy in and of itself is destructive or deconstructive, meaning we are unraveling an old assumptions, old meanings. So there is a destructive, deconstructive process as we go inward and consider who we are and why we think the way we think. Um, so, so my upbringing in relation to religion, the joke in the family is when my folks gave me all of the memorabilia, childhood memorabilia that they had collected over the years, and I was now an adult. Included in that was a certificate, and it was my cradle roll certificate. I was an infant, and when mom and dad would go to church, they had a nursery where the young ones were kept, and so I would say I was born in the church, okay? I grew up in the church. Our family life, our social life was all around the church. I have many good memories of that because many of my friends over the years were born out of that social life. It was a community that I felt safe in, that I, just have many good memories about. Um, The part that was very confusing to me was that I grew up in a household that was highly contentious and conflictual, given my father's, we'll just call it PTSD for the moment. Um, and I remember every evening we had a very organized home, which in ways I'm very thankful for. You could set my watch to my mom's schedule. We eat at 5:30. Saturday is wash day. Blah blah blah. And but the dinner table every night was rift with tension. My father was just he just needed to control every last little thing. I was a squirmy worm. I had a strong constitution, so I wasn't going quietly. I would oftentimes end up in my room without dinner because there would be something going on. And in all this contention, at the end of the evening or at the end of dinner, we would have devotions. And we had this little, it was shaped like a loaf of bread, and then a bunch of little Bible verses in it called the Bread of Life. And we each had to read a Bible verse, and then we had turns praying every night. This is in the midst of a traumatic, contentious environment. So that was just very confusing to me. On Sunday mornings, my dad would be sitting out in the car honking the horn because he wanted to get to church on time, while mom was getting herself ready, getting 3 children ready, and putting a roast in the oven so we had food when we got home at the end of the day. There was tension all the way to church. We would get out of the car, there would be, hi, wonderful day. And so there's this crazy making going on between what's being preached, the love of God and faith, and gentleness and kindness and love, and what was going on behind closed doors.
Wow.
So for many years, I would say I went to a Christian university, master's degree, same. Um, I was a high school youth director in a church for 4 years. Um, Again, many wonderful memories, but at the age of, I would say, 32, um, the family, we decided that we weren't going to participate in organized religion anymore. And I remember initially Sundays where I would look around, I would see families all dressed up and going to church, and really this fear, guilt, like, what am I doing? And so there was almost kind of like I was withdrawing from a kind of cultish experience, being told what to believe, what not to believe, how to feel, how to behave. And so life is instructed from the outside in. I would say I never got a chance to be. I never got a chance to listen to myself, to communicate to you,
Wow.
for you to listen to me and respond back in connection, right? So in that world of growing up, I was told how to be. And so it really wasn't until the age, well, I would say I've always been a seeker. I was a seeker within that context, of those confines, but gradually moving out into the world. And I'm still on that path, okay?
Aren't we all?
Whether we know it or
It's
not,
constantly.
we're still on that path, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And you really have just, since the moment I met you, I just was instantly intrigued with you because of your authenticity and your ableness to be vulnerable. Like, I really just saw it in your presence with people. And to me, that's like the ultimate spiritual act, is really showing up with people and loving them just as they are.
Being in the moment, being fully in the moment, not worrying about
being
the next
in the
moment,
now.
what's going to happen, what I just said, ruminating about those things, just being in the moment.
Yeah, and you do that well. So I wanted to give you kudos for that.
I'm practicing daily. It's a daily practice. Yeah,
it sure is, right? You mentioned it earlier, but I think it's important to say again is you have to show up for yourself to show up for others, and it's non-negotiable.
It starts by being open to yourself. And that includes thinking about the past, okay? Because our pasts are part of our present experience.
But not letting the past shape us, right? Like, it's looking at it but not judging it. It's a fine line of it's like a dance almost, wouldn't you say?
Oh no, it's a dance. Yeah.
I'm so grateful for your time and for your energy and for all the love that you pour out to both Brian and myself and our family, and the way that you hold space for everyone you encounter.
I get it back in spades. So the feeling's mutual. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Uncle Dave is going to be a recurring guest, so you will be hearing more from him in episodes to come. But today I really just wanted to introduce him and just the incredible man and just person that he is to this world and the greater good of society. Like, he really is a living, breathing, walking example of what it means to walk in love and to hold space for others with intention. So I really just wanted you all to get a feel for that, and also just take some notes from someone who is not only doing it in their occupation, but in their personal lives as well. So, Uncle Dave, thank you so much for your time today.
I love our time together.
Thank you so much. Would you be willing to take a little sweet breath with me to close out our space and our time together?
I'd love to. I'll follow you.
Okay. All right. Taking a deep inhale through your nose And exhaling however feels good for you. And shaking it out a little bit with your body, just letting some of that energy that we've been talking about and experiencing through this space go. Thank you so much,
You're
Uncle Dave.
welcome.
I love you so
Big hug to
much.
you.
And
I'm here when you want to talk
always,
again. So,
I look forward to
okay.
it. I love you, and I hope you have a great rest
You
of your
too.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey there, it's Danae again. Just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time and energy with me. If this podcast resonates, please like, subscribe, follow, and share if you're willing. Reviews help too, so if you're feeling the vibe, please leave a review where you can. Sending all the love. Peace.